Hey, we're here today with the Mayor of City of Canton, Thomas Bernabei. Been in office now about, what, 2.5 years?
Closing in on it, 2 years, at least and a quarter, huh?
Right.
Yes.
And we're here today to talk about issue 13, which is the request on the part of City of Canton government for voters of Canton to allow a 0.5% increase in the city income tax, which will bring it, if passed, to 2.5%. So the Stark County Political Report's perspective is endeavoring to probe. I realize that, and of course the Stark County Political Report supports the effort of City of Canton to increase its revenue, so that we take a more critical look than what's been done so far is not to indicate that there's no support from the Stark County Political Report. However, if it's a merited request, any questions anybody should ask should be welcome.
Well, absolutely. You know, as with this, as with anything, when you are an elected official, I think that Joe answers to all questions. You know, some are softball questions, some may be difficult, some may be challenging, some may involve somebody throwing a tomato at you, but that's still part of the job, so fire away.
Okay, and of course, Mayor Bernabei, having been a Stark County Commissioner, knows difficult situations because he and fellow Commissioner Janet Creighton, elected in 2010, waded into a lack of confidence in county government at the time to be able to pass a justice system sales tax in November of 2011. So you've been down this road before.
Yes. And
my question is, threshold question is, how does issue 13 not pass? Because it seems like everybody is behind, that is anybody, in terms of influencing the public and the voters, is wildly for issue 13. So is there any chance this issue could fail?
Well, my first question and comment to you is, how comes President Trump's lawyers got to see all of Robert Mueller's questions in advance, and I don't get to see your questions in advance? And I'm just joking.
Because you're a much more secure political figure than the president is, in my opinion.
And you're not going to issue me a subpoena, are you? How does it not pass? Even though there was no organized opposition, and even though we've gone and attempted to go to business, to labor, to the neighborhoods, and to the people who have to vote, and I think that we've run a good issue campaign. You could always do more, and you always think that as you close in on the end. It is still difficult to pass a tax increase. I think people that are uncertain and are voting tend not to. It's not a choice between one name and another where that is at risk for them, and people even sometimes will vote for a name that they recognize the name, but they don't know who that person is for that office that they're voting for. But with a tax issue, I think that they look at that and they can understand that this is a tax increase, and that people, just as a general rule, do not like the word tax, and people as a general rule do not want to pay more in taxes. So therefore our job is to do the best that we can to explain why we are asking them to pay more taxes. So I think that to that extent that state of mind exists I think in all voters, and a state of mind exists probably for you or I when we write that check on April 15th. You always wish that your taxes were a little bit lower. You also always wish that your taxes were being spent well, and when you believe that they're being spent well and understand that there is a need for them, I think then there's a greater understanding and a greater willingness to pay more taxes. So our job is to explain, and this is a great opportunity to explain it as you ask me various questions, that we think that we have a tremendous need for this tax. We think that Canton has a tremendous need, and we hope to explain how we will spend that money, and we hope to explain to people that we will spend it well and for very important and needed things for the city of Canton.
Does Canton have a plan B should it fail?
We do not have a plan B in that you put all of your efforts into it, and it takes a considerable amount of effort just to get an issue to the point of having good ballot language that people agree on before it even goes to the ballot. It has to be language then that's legally scrutinized, and then it's got to be just a good campaign in which you have to sell it. Our starting point on this was, going to business, and we met with many business leaders through the Chamber of Commerce and several large meetings to explain why we were increasing taxes, and many of them are the people that pay a significant portion of these taxes. We went to the Chamber and asked them for their endorsement. We've gone to multiple, and I have gone to multiple neighborhood meetings. I have one tonight. I have one.
And where is that
night.
meeting?
Tonight is Maple Park,
Okay.
Northeast. Tomorrow night is, believe it or not, it is Market Hills Association where I live.
I
So
see.
I'm going to speak at that. I'm going to speak to the Rotary tomorrow. So between just tonight and Thursday, not to the Rotary on Friday, between the next 3 days, I have three opportunities to speak to people and to explain this to them. So I go wherever I can to explain issue 13. Of course, we've been to the repository, and we are doing advertising, just all the various things that you do, but we are trying to do as much outreach as possible to explain it. And the most outreach that is being done and that has been done is through the mail.
Okay.
Through direct mailing.
Okay.
And when we complete
I don't
this
see
campaign-
any signs out.
When we complete this campaign, we will have mailed 7 times.
I see. And so that's your focus rather than putting the signs
Well,
out?
that's my focus. This is also a document, and I will give you a clean copy of this, but a document that we put together in relatively rare honor that I put together, and that is, to me, commonly asked questions and answers. We've put that on a Facebook page so people can look at it. Whenever I talk to an organization, I always use this as the basis. I hand this out to people. So, we've gone through a bunch of reprintings of this document. We do have 1,000 yard signs. So we
Okay.
do have a yard sign campaign.
So-
1,000 yard signs, it sounds like a lot. It's like a pile of topsoil laying in your yard until you start spreading it out, and all of a sudden you look around and you say, where did it go?
Right.
So we do have yard signs out in the
Okay.
neighborhoods, and there's still some left to be out at polling places and over the last weekend and so forth.
Okay.
So we do have a yard sign campaign.
Okay. Now, speaking of the Facebook page, try to do my homework before I come and ask questions of public officials. And the followers on that page is less than 100.
Okay.
Does that concern you at all? That maybe there's some
No.
apathy out there?
No, there is clearly apathy with regard, not only I think to this issue, but with regard to all issues, and we will see what the election numbers and the election turnout is. But look at the numbers in the last, both general and primary elections over the last 2 or 3 years or 5 years or even the last decade, and we see them continually decreasing. So there was apathy. I don't know that there's specific apathy to this issue. I think people have less interest in issues as opposed to personalities, and I think that we have some obviously very heated races that will bring people out probably for the May primary, both on the Republican side and governor, which has been very heated, and some of the other races and so forth which are contested, as well as we have on the Democratic side. I think we have a governor's choice there also, which has not been quite as heated. But we also have a great local race, and that is between 2 great candidates on the Democratic Party for judge. And they both run very strong candidates, and they're both very, very well qualified people. So I think people get more interested in people races as opposed to issue races. And the other thing was that, again, I'm not a social media person. I'm too old, I think, to be a social media person. Although my wife is my same age, and she is a social media person, at least. She spends a lot of time on the internet. But we made a conscious decision, and again, this is through Council Member John Mariel, who put the Facebook page together, that he was not going to push it out more than just to have it there for people that wanted to inquire and ask questions. that they could go to it and ask those questions. I think that even this document, when I pass this out, and several other documents,
Right.
have the website where you can actually go and see the actual comprehensive plan, for example. We did not post that because it's so large, but that is on, for example, the City of Canton's website. So, we wanted to put information out for people that are interested in that information, but basically the information that we do put out in the campaign, as in any campaign, is pretty simple and a repeated message.
Okay. Going back to the Justice System Sales Pact, so when you as commissioner voted with your fellow commissioners to put that on, one of the things that you did that probably was key was do it for a term of years, 8 years.
Yes, I think that was 5 years.
Okay, 5 years.
I think it was 5 years, was it not?
I think it was 8, but that is,
okay.
The point is not so much the years is that it's not continuing, which the Canton income tax proposal is. And of course, my wife is a member of Stark County Educational Service Center,
Yes.
who they just voted
So she's been on
to
the
put
hot seat
a security and mental health resource levy on. And the big bone of contention there was, and perhaps in this particular issue, is why not put it on for a term of years? And my wife, in full disclosure, differed with the Stark County political report. She voted for continuing. For me, my bias is for a term of years. And the reason is it's a voter accountability factor. So, and I know that as commissioner and as mayor, you are big on being accountable for government activity. So why not? And one of the criticisms I have gotten on the Canton issue is the continuing factor. Can you address that, please?
Absolutely. Number one, we discussed that obviously when we put together the ballot language. One factor, maybe I'll talk about some things, lose my track, and get me back on point. But one factor was that when you read the comprehensive plan essentially talks about a private-public partnership, on the minimum side. Canton has so many development and other neighborhood needs and so forth, and I think we all recognize that. The plan, though, literally calls for $250 million over 15 years. Half of it to be raised from the public side, half of it from the private foundation business sector side. And again, when you talk to Charles Buki, who's the architect, the man who designed it, he will say that the $250 million is a number, and if you look at all the needs in our neighborhoods and so forth, you well exceed $250 million. So the reality was that Canton has unlimited needs going into the future, but part of the calculation in doing this was if we put a 0.5% tax on, it will raise approximately $11.5 million. If we're able to set aside, as we have done with our ballot language, and I want to get back to that, so please remind me to do so, give 60% of that, dedicate 60% of that to the comprehensive plan for those kinds of long-term development issues and neighborhood development issues and so forth. That would generate about $6.5 to $7 million. If you multiply that out over 15 years, you don't get up to $125 million even then. So we felt that the term of this tax had to be, at a minimum, 15 years just to generate that $125 million number, and we still even fall slightly short of that number over 15 years on our current tax base. And once we reached the point of putting on the tax for 15 years, then of course the conversation was, at 15 years you might as well put it on indefinitely. I think if you look at other cities' income taxes, all cities and municipalities, townships are very different. They use property taxes and levies of that nature, and they are almost always put on, as we did with the sales tax, for terms. Income taxes, if you look around, are almost always, if not unanimously, and I've looked at the 10 largest cities in Ohio for permanent needs. And another part of that reason is some of the taxes doesn't go for those kinds of needs, again, which are huge and unending and will just continue to grow because of the age of our city and so forth. But you're also dedicating some of this money to, police and fire, and to the extent that you start to grow your force, if you were able to do so, or you start spending more money on them, and all of a sudden you reach the point where you now have come to the end of the term of a stream of revenue that you've been utilizing for certain purposes, then you're in deep trouble at that point. So for a variety of reasons, it's something that we definitely looked at. We looked at it fairly thoroughly, and everybody that was looking at this concluded that for a municipality and for municipal income tax, a permanent tax made sense.
Okay. As an alternative.
And if I may add one thing before
Sure.
What's very important about the ballot language is it talks about that the money shall be used exclusively for defined purposes.
Right.
Because I think that another large concern of people is that the money not get spent willy-nilly on this, that, or whatever that mayors and or city councils over time can do and sometimes do. So this language very specifically talks about creating some very specific funds, and that the money shall be used exclusively for expenditures for those funds, which means that an expenditure that is outside of that exclusive definition is improper, unlawful, not in the criminal sense, but unlawful in the way it is spent, and subject to being called back.
As an alternative to having a levy for a term of years, I have an experience with the Lake schools where years ago they put on a levy effort, and the superintendent at that time promised the voters that if they passed the issue, that there would be a written periodic report of accountability of exactly how those dollars are spent. So my question to you is would Canton commit to say, in the first collection takes place, I think, on July 1st, if it passes, and so by the end of 2018, you'll have a half year's worth of revenue. Now, beginning with that half year and then annually thereafter in January of the subsequent year, is Canton willing to commit to the voters to putting out a report, chapter and verse, on how that money is spent?
Absolutely, I would be more than happy to do so. I'm not sure whether we'd be ready to do one by December 31 of 2018. You're correct, the language says that it starts being collected on July 1, but again, the way taxes are paid, the money really isn't received almost for another quarter, essentially. So by the time you got to the end of the year, you'd only have received a quarter of a year's receipts and so forth, and there's probably still planning to be done. So I would think that an annual report from July 1 of every year or December 31 of every year and so forth would be good and would be great. And people, again, they're entitled to ask hard questions, but they're also entitled to be informed about how their money is being spent. So absolutely.
Okay. Now, in terms of priorities, I get questions about why is the comprehensive plan the priority? Shouldn't it be safety forces? Because one thing that I hear constantly with cities like Canton is that people don't feel safe. And if people don't feel safe, it's hard to attract people coming and taking up roots in Canton. So how do you respond to that question?
I would respond by saying that people did not leave Canton, and part of the basic premise, and please always get me back when I start wondering, but part of the basic premise of this and the comprehensive plan, and if you read it, the first 10 pages are relatively depressing set of facts and information and so forth, but the two largest that I always use are population decline of 119,000 people in the 50s to 71,000 today, and the increase in poverty and all of the things that come with poverty, which includes crime, from the 50s when there was a pretty stable society and so forth in Canton, to a poverty rate today of probably 35%, with another probably 30% of the people in that secondary level of poverty, single family earners and so forth. My answer is that people didn't leave Canton because of safety concerns. They left Canton because Canton did not provide them, economic development opportunities, jobs, Canton also stopped growing. I mean, one of the errors that was made, and it hasn't been made recently, but it was made probably 50 or 60 years ago, and that was Canton had the preeminent and continues to have the preeminent water supply. And in a perfect world, our forefathers would have used that water supply much in a similar fashion that was done in Columbus and Franklin County, and that was essentially annex the county. So what happened in Canton is people became more affluent. People wanted, larger lots and bigger houses and nicer places to live and greener places to live and so forth. And Canton couldn't provide that. And Canton couldn't also provide jobs and so forth. So to me, you have to get to the root of the problem and adding more safety forces, although we are always looking at that issue and are always looking at safety, and that is the number one obligation of government in my mind, and I think in most people's mind. We have to get to the root cause of all of these things, and I think the comprehensive plan talks about that.
Okay, and then of course your priorities of how to spend the money if the levy passed. It does have public safety forces / general fund as the second priority. So, and we went through this in the Healy administration. There was actually a group that really pushed very hard for specific numbers of policemen to be on the Canton payroll. I'm being told that because of budgetary constraints that there's been a dip again in the number of police and fire. Is that accurate or is it inaccurate?
That is not accurate.
Okay.
I'd have to go back to another file to give the exact numbers, but essentially what happens in the course of the year, you do have retirements, and I'm just going to say on average we've retired probably 6 police officers this past year, again, because they just reached the age of retirement, and probably about the same in the fire department because both departments are fairly the same size. We have recently hired, and it may have been 8 retirements in police, but we recently exhausted our civil service list, and within the last 30 days I've sworn in 6 new police officers. So we're almost up to that same level of force that we were, and the only reason that we would need to go a little bit further, or that we haven't already, is because we exhausted the civil service list that was out there, and we have to now create a new one and then vet those candidates. Same thing on the fire side. I think I swore in, and again, it was just to bring us back up to that 144 core number. I think I swore in either 8 or 10 within the last 2 weeks. So that has not been an issue for us, okay. Our budget. We are maintaining the existing force. The question going forward is whether or not we are going to increase.
Okay. And so, as I recall, the target number for the group that I referred to was 175. Are we somewhere in that neighborhood right now?
I think on the police side we are at 161, and again, we can take a break and I can grab
No.
I actually have those numbers and I check on them. I don't want to confuse fire with police.
Right.
But no, we're not at 175. I'm thinking
is that an optimal? Is that an optimal number?
No, that was just a number that was kind of pulled out of the air and utilized. I'm not sure if the city was at some point in time at 175 or whether they were or not. I really do not know that answer. I don't know that anybody's ever done a study, and depending on how you police and how you utilize them and a variety of factors, I don't know that there is any fixed number for a city like Canton or for any other place. That was a number, again, that was Bruce Nordman, who, again, is a leader of one of our neighborhood associations. I talk to him fairly often. He was a regular visitor, if you'll recall, at the commissioner's offices.
Right.
As well.
Because you remember specifically what I'm talking about. Right.
So I understand that campaign and so forth, but that is not the kind of campaign certainly that drives me to say we have to have 175.
Okay.
I mean, it's my job in conjunction with the safety director, in conjunction with the chief of police on that side, to determine what our needs are and attempt to satisfy those as best that we can.
Okay. Now, on the police, for the money you're going to be additional that you will have if the levy passes, what is going to be the focus within the safety forces factor?
Well, again, and I'm just looking at some notes, and we've used these notes before, and every time I've talked about this, one asked that question. Again, if you look at the ballot language, in the ballot language, I point to this document only because it's printed out the ballot language exactly. 1/10% shall be allocated to the general fund for public safety, police and fire, and other general operating expenses. So that was that first tenth. 1/10%, that's 20% of the increase, because we're increasing at 0.5, so 1/10 is 20% of the increase. That generates about $2.3 million a year on the current tax base. And we're saying that 2/3 of that would go to safety and 1/3 would go to the general fund for other general.
Yeah, are there
needs.
specific targets?
Not by way of numbers and what I've written and what my notes have been, and we worked on this. So 2/3, that would be about $1.4 million to $1.6 million per year for police and fire. And that would be, number one, to maintain staffing, because we don't certainly want to fall further behind. Additional hiring, if feasible. And the reason that that's an if feasible number is because future hiring is conditioned on the city's future general fund condition, which is something that we're always concerned about. I mean, it doesn't do me much good to hire more officers if this generates another $1 million or $1.4 million, and our other general fund now goes down $1 million or $1.4 million for a period of time. I'm still really at the back point of being a breaking even point and so forth. So it can, it has to be conditioned. I can't make any firm commitments like that.
Let me interject.
General fund and just continuing the continuation and or discontinuation of the COPS grants that we get from the federal government and the SAFER grants that we also receive. They are critical, and they have been critical to our hiring. I think that probably the last 50 officers that we've hired, and certainly on the police side, have been primarily through the COPS grants, which are received from the federal government.
Let me ask this
portion of theirs, but also for radio equipment, vehicles, and other needs of the departments.
Let me ask this question. These numbers that are and percentages that are spelled out are to use Al Gore's expression, are these in a lockbox? Does that mean that if Canton's general fund erodes, that this money that's being voted on now cannot, under any circumstances, find its way into the general fund?
It's 1/3 of the first 1/10 could, because we said that.
Right. But beyond that,
no, this money isn't a lockbox. The amounts of it may change. Again, when I say $11.5 million, and I'm giving you the numbers of these percentages right now, that's just based upon what our current tax base is.
Right, you're talking
that
volume.
Tax base grows.
Right.
It grows.
But the percentages are in a lockbox,
The
right?
percentages are in a lockbox. Yes.
Okay, all right.
The gross amount of revenue can vary both up and down, and obviously we hope realistically that it will grow. But we intend to use, and again, we'll get back to that.
Okay.
I should give you this, by the way, that would help you ask some questions. But again, 10% of the
Right.
1/10%, 2/3 of which go to police and fire, another 10% of the increase goes to essentially to roads, 10% of the increase goes to neighborhoods, and again, then that leaves 60% which we want to spend on comprehensive plan purposes, many of which are neighborhood and quality of life type of things.
Going back to the
yes, it's in a
comprehensive...
lockbox, and the language in the ballot puts it in a lockbox.
Okay. Moving back to the comprehensive plan, just briefly, question I didn't ask that I want to ask. Mm-hmm. Is there a private commitment, a private sector commitment to share in the comprehensive plan? Or is anybody, I know some of your contributors to finance the campaign are private sector people. Are some of these people ready, willing, and able to contribute dollars to? Because I think the idea was, it was like you referred to earlier in our conversation, a partnership. Of course, if this passes, this is Canton government's partnership. How about the private sector?
There are no commitments. But I have little doubt that our private sector will step up. I think it's going to be on a project-by-project basis, as will our spending of this money. And so one project may lend itself, and the partnership comes into getting the private sector involved and assisting us with matching money in different areas and so forth. I would anticipate that some of this comprehensive plan money would be matching grants to somebody else or to a developer or to someone else to give them that little push that they need to do a project, and they put in 2 or 3 times what our contribution is. So I think it's going to be on a case-by-case basis, and I think that we're going to have to go to our businesses and to our foundations and so forth on a case-by-case basis and say, yes, here is the general overall, approach to everything, but what we will do by way of first, second, and third priorities maybe depends on exactly which one is developing or has the best chances of developing first, both in importance but also in actually happening. I would say as of today, again, and we have our neighborhoods and or areas that are defined in the comprehensive plan, I think that the work that Altman Hospital is doing right now in developing a campus plan and so forth, I think that is fairly along in its development and so forth. They have not come to us and asked us for money. Our planner works with them on that plan, and he is willing and able and does work with anybody on different ideas and so forth. He spreads himself, pretty well on any and all ideas. But I would say that perhaps the first area that will provide assistance, and it may be in the type of assistance that, if Altman Hospital in doing a campus plan needs to have streets restructured in some way, shape, or form, and or work of that nature and so forth, I would think that this is the kind of money that would, some of it would go to assist them in pushing forward that. So that may be the first priority. Market Square may be a priority into the future. It just depends on exactly where we are with other funding and other things. And if a newer developer were to come by and say, hey, I've got a great idea for, a new something here, or if a company were to come in and say, hey, we want to bring 250 jobs into Canton, by the way, but we need, sewer and infrastructure to a certain property and so forth. Those are the kinds of things that we would look at in that order. So those developer dollars count. Altman Hospital dollars would count. We would certainly ask the foundations to help, with regard to the more civic type of issues and so forth. So I think that the commitment is out there.
On streets and roads, which is highly important to a typical citizen, how far is Canton behind in having the condition of streets and road in an acceptable condition, and how long will it take with the infusion of new money to get it up to an acceptable standard?
Again, I'm waiting to get by Tuesday before we say to our engineering department, give us some choices. One thing that I know for sure will be, if we pass this, we will have approximately $1.1 million more that we can devote solely to capital, and most of that, or probably all of that's really going to go to streets, because we have obviously some very.
Do you agree that Canton streets and roads aren't where they need to be?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And we're 10 years away from that. Maybe we're more than that away from that. So we have to fund them. We have to use engineers to examine them and tell us which ones you have to fix first and what you have to do to them. In some cases, it is filling potholes. In other cases, it's chipping and sealing. And in other cases, it's blacktopping the whole street. And in some cases, it's tearing the doggone thing up and going down to the base and starting over, essentially, because the street is so eroded in some way, shape, or form. And different projects cost different amounts of money. I think just the paving of, which is rather extraordinary, with a little bit of base work just where needed, which wasn't a whole lot, I don't think, but paving of 30th Street between Market and Cleveland Avenue, which was 2 years ago, I think that was like a $1.5 million project.
Okay.
So paving is expensive. Streets are expensive. Again, I emphasize, though, the need to put the money into the comprehensive plan as opposed to streets, because, again, people didn't leave Canton because the streets were bad. They left Canton for other reasons, and we have to get back to those core areas. I'm very, very pleased that we're going to have another $1 million a year to throw into this. And by the way, some of the neighborhood money can, go into helping with streets and neighborhoods as well and so forth. So we will certainly have, if this passes, at least $1 million plus more money for potholes and paving and so forth than we have today, which is, a significant amount on an annual basis. I think our annual paving is probably, I'd have to actually see a number on that, but it's probably comes close to doubling the amount that we use on an annual paving basis. So it means that we should probably get twice as much work done. I'm excluding from that the big projects like 38th Street and so forth, where you get OPWC money and Ohio Public Works money and so forth.
Would it be fair to say that you go back pretty frequently in this conversation to the comprehensive plan? Would it be fair to say that your focus in doing that is that Canton has to become overall attractive to existing residents and in terms of interesting others to come live in the city limits of Canton? Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely, and I think that we need to start with our neighborhoods, and we've already started with our neighborhoods. That's worthy of a topic in and of itself. And someday I think it'd be a great story for you to do, and that is just to follow what code enforcement is doing today versus what it did 3 years ago. And I can tell you that in 2017 they did 11,000 inspections. And when I go around the city, I see a difference. And I don't know, whether you do or not, but we see a lot of differences, and the people involved in the business see a lot of differences, and we just have to keep pushing that envelope to improve the quality, of the neighborhoods where the people live, and the quality, as do force people in many cases to take care of their property that they don't take care of. Nothing deteriorates a neighborhood quickly than having one lousy neighbor, or if you have two nice houses and a bad house in between. If you clean up that bad house, by the way, all of a sudden you now have a nice start. And if you have 4 houses that are nice and one bad one, and you clean that one up, and sometimes you have to do it, you always hope to encourage people to take pride in ownership and so forth, but some people don't take pride in ownership, so therefore you do it with again.
Are the neighborhood associations helpful in that regard?
Absolutely. We have a great relationship with the neighborhood associations. We have something that's called the Mayor's Neighborhood Commission, which was in existence before I got here, but it really wasn't in existence. But we brought that back. I go to the Neighborhood Leadership Council, which is composed of really 25 to 40 neighborhood associations that meet on a regular basis. So I go and talk to them once or twice a year. I went and talked to them about issue 13. I've talked to them before. But they select 6 neighborhood leaders, usually the president of an association, who represent all of them then on the Mayor's Neighborhood Commission. And we meet once every 2 months. They're good meetings. We've gotten to know each other well. We listen to their problems. They listen to ours, because it's important to understand why government does things sometimes this way versus that way, or sometimes why they don't have enough money to do it at all. And we listen to their problems. They also come in with lists, and I think that the first meeting that we had, they came in probably with a list of several hundred. These are the biggest nuisance problems in our neighborhood, and we want you to take care of them. And those are the ones that we gave priority to. So we have a really good relationship with the neighborhoods, and I feel very, very good about that. But the starting point for that has been code enforcement, and that's really the starting point of every one of our meetings every 2 months. And then we'll digress. I have the street superintendent come in and explain to them, how we choose roads to pave, and how we repair potholes, and why we chip and seal, and even how a pothole happens, which is kind of interesting stuff. He made a presentation. We'll have the engineer come in. We'll have the arborist come in and talk about trees in the neighborhoods and so forth. So it's all been good. So the neighborhoods, I think, are very much behind everything that we're doing. The neighborhood associations are very, very, very much behind, stricter and stronger code enforcement, and all that they really want to see is more. And again, we're at 11,000, and I think that we'll probably do more than that this year. And I would say 3 years ago, that department essentially had one inspector and very few clerks to process the work. They were probably doing, 250 inspections. We now have a full-time lawyer up there, which has also changed the nature of enforcement. We have 5 or 6 code inspectors, we have 5 or 6 clerks and so forth, and really it's an entity that is really performing very, very well. But the neighborhoods love that.
When we talk the word infrastructure, is that really a focus on the underground sewer system, or is it encompass more than that?
I think infrastructure to me encompasses when I think of it. I think it includes, water. Again, these things can be separately funded because we have a water revenue fund and so forth, and a sewer fund and so forth. But when I talk about infrastructure, I'm talking about, water and sewer, both sanitary and the collections, storm side of the sewer, water and roads.
Okay.
I'm talking about the base of roads as well as infrastructure. I think is the blacktop on roads.
What condition is the sewer system in Canton? Do you know? Because that can, that's unseen, and all of a sudden there's a problem and can become a major headache for city government. What's your assessment of the condition of Canton's sewer system?
I really have to bring in the department has to tell you what their assessment of it is. Again, in many places we have an aging one. We're trying to spend more and more money every year on maintenance. To do so, those funds, and again, they're self-sufficient or revenue funds, meaning the water department, for example, operates like it is a business. The general fund doesn't put any money into the water fund, nor can the general fund take any money out of the water fund. So your water bills and your water rates, by the way, go solely to operating.
Those are what they call
revenue funds.
Revenue funds, right? Enterprise funds.
Enterprise funds and revenue funds and so forth. And so
are the sewers
to the extent?
Are they enterprise fund factors?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So because there's a monthly bill that goes out.
Yeah.
And if
and as is the sanitation department is another part. I don't call that infrastructure, but sanitation is another revenue or enterprise fund.
Okay, so as you assess the condition, there is an alternative way to raise revenues to solve those problems.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And we talked. You talked quite a bit about it, but my question on the blighted properties factor is: are we getting closer to the day when blighted properties will pretty much be a thing of the past within the city limits of Canton?
I think honestly, and again, the current programs that we have with the land bank, the neighborhood initiative programs and so forth, with the money that came from the foreclosure lawsuits that passed their way through to the attorney generals and then down to our local land banks. Canton's been the recipient of probably $6 to $8 to $10 million, and we put some of our own money into that. That's been the basis of our demolition program, not code enforcement. Code enforcement is separate. The code enforcement people are also driving the demolition side of this thing, but it's a different source of funding. That money is gone, and I cannot tell you how many houses have been demolished. Literally 400 some houses, I believe, were demolished in one program. I bet if you went back 10 years, because there's been ongoing demolitions and so forth, literally 1,000 or more houses have been demolished. I do not have that number. We're in the midst of probably doing, I think, 250 to 300 houses probably this year. I think that we have a 90-day, 90 houses in 90 days is happening right now, and that's a push that's happening right now. So, and again, you have to drive our neighborhoods and drive some of our old neighborhoods and see some of these houses to understand that when they reach a certain point of neglect and of age, there is no solution. I'm a believer that if we can save a house, we want to save a house, and I would prefer it to be that way. We have a really good working relationship also with Habitat for Humanity, and we offer them two things that they do. We offer them to look at any house that we're going to demolish and say, if you can save these, because you can do it, because they can do it very, very efficiently, in how they, fund and do work with volunteers and so forth, and they're just very good at what they do. If you can save this house, we will be, more than gladly deed it to you for nothing and give it to you and allow you to save it. And or the alternative is go through this house, and if there's anything in here that is salvageable for you that you can utilize in any of your other Habitat houses and so forth, we want you to have the first opportunity to do so. But the need for demolitions is, I think, continuing.
Okay. How about
And
your
it
city?
will be continuing.
How about the city's relationship with the Stark County Land Bank?
I think it's very, very good. I mean, I think the bulk, and again, I would have to look at a report, but I would think that, and because the land bank has money that they need to spend and want to spend, Canton has the most aggressive and also the most, I think, well-organized administrative program to utilize that money. So we have received the bulk of that money, and I think that we have a very good working relationship with them.
Two more questions. First one is to do with, and I know that cities and almost all localities in Ohio have really been hammered by the Ohio General Assembly. And I think the figure that folks involved in issue 13 is putting out there is $20 million that it's cost Canton. And I've written many blogs
Absolutely.
about the horror of that. And but I think that I get around Stark County pretty well. I see a lot of different management styles of government at all levels, political subdivisions. I think mismanagement has been a factor too in city and township government and border, even schools probably. How much of is that a factor at all going back before your administration? And you've already alluded to 50 or 60 years ago. But it's more than just 50 or 60 years ago that the condition that we find Canton in today. So are those issues being looked at in terms of use of the new money if voters approve it, to make sure that you have the very best efficient and effective administration of those funds that can possibly be?
Well, again, from my perspective, absolutely. Hey, democracy is a wonderful thing. It's the best choice out there by way of government, and it's the best choice of government in the entire world. A downside of democracy is that anybody can put their name on a ballot and get elected, and depending on the well-known, whether the name is well-known or not or otherwise, or depending on how good of a campaign they can run, somebody can be elected to be a chief executive of a city or of a township or of a county and have very little practical experience, or perhaps even very little common sense and so forth. They may have great political sense and so forth, and people elect people that probably shouldn't have been elected, because I think that you need to understand government first. Government does operate differently than business. I think that you have to understand business. I think you have to be able to go between the two of them. I think you have to understand financial statements and revenues and expenditures. I think you have to understand union contracts and things like that. And to the extent that people get elected that don't have, those kinds of backgrounds and experiences and so forth, it probably leads to less than always making the best decision, for the political subdivision. So, there are downsides to our elective system, and obviously you and I can both, run off a name of a list of names at all levels of government.
Right.
That we would say, boy, that guy should have never been elected, and boy, look what he or she brought to the table, and boy, we walk away scratching our heads.
Okay,
but
final question.
We continue to looking, and that's probably, I spend more time than anything, and that is just pushing everybody to up their game. If you're a C player, I want you to become a B minus player, and when you get to being B minus and doing your work, I want you to become a B plus, and then I want you to get to an A. And I think that we just have to keep pushing, and we have to look at the finances. Even this kind of an issue, like putting issue 13 together, is a real challenge, putting it together with all of the groups that you have to. So we've had great support, and I do want to emphasize we've had great support. We've had unanimous support. We have, police and fire. We have 3 unions among them who have endorsed this. ASME has endorsed it. So city unions are behind this. In the private sector, the East Ohio Building Trades have endorsed this and have been great contributors to it. The plumbers and pipe fitters, the iron workers, great groups of private labor, the laborers union have endorsed it. So people that are out there in Canton doing the work have endorsed it. On the business side, we got the chamber involved in this and so forth. So it takes, again, that kind of leadership or whatever it requires to put that together, to put something like this together. So this is all good.
Okay, final question.
Okay.
May 8th comes and goes. There's a celebration late in the evening. The income tax issue passes. And of course, Mayor Bernabei thanks the community of Canton for heeding the call. Does Mayor Bernabei also say, you know what? This is a vote of confidence in the Bernabei administration, and so tonight I announce that I will be running for re-election as mayor of Canton.
Well, I can tell you, and I think you and I have had this conversation before, probably 3 or 6 months ago and so forth. I'll hold off to that decision until some appropriate time to say yes or no to it. I would say that if this is approved, that probably enhances the chances that I may choose to run for election again.
Well, thank you, Canton Mayor Thomas Bernabei. Very candid and comprehensive answer to the Stark County Political Report's probing questions.
As always, I am, again, it's part of my job as an elected official. It's part of everyone's job as an elected official to be asked questions and to answer them to the best of our ability. And I thank you, really, as I always have in the past, for you coming around and taking the interest and the time and the commitment that you have to asking people questions. And I would encourage you to go around and ask more elected officials more questions and see what responses you get on a whole wide swath of all kinds of issues. No, it's good. That's a good part of democracy. It's a great part of democracy.
It is. Thank you, Mayor.
Absolutely. Thank you.